Right. A warm welcome to everybody. Now, in 2019, I had the rare opportunity of interviewing an 18-year-old gentleman at Ekumfi in the central region of Ghana. His story struck me because at the tender age of 9, his biological mother had given him off to a man who scouts for children to work as an aide within the fishing area of Yeji. In exchange for going into servitude, his mother was to receive an unspecified amount of money. Aside being robbed of his childhood, he never stepped in a foot into a classroom for all those years. He recounted the near-death experiences he had whilst detangling fishnets in the water and the harrowing treatment he suffered at the hands of his master and his wife.
In this side of the world.
2 pieces of cloth and 120 Ghana cedis, pittance for 9 years of sheer slavery. I looked into his eyes and it was a blend of so many emotions. There was anger, there was pain, there was fear, and a complete loss of where he found himself. And that was it for me. Human trafficking of any form simply can't be tolerated. That's how I welcome you to the April 2021 edition of the webinar series for the Center for Gender Research, Advocacy and Documentation, UCC. And my name is Akosia Chiabiasaki, your moderator, and it's a pleasure to have all of you come on board this afternoon. Now, this edition is a special one because it is a session that is in collaboration with the Israeli Embassy in Ghana, and I'll quickly invite the host for this particular public lecture, Dr. Georgina Yaudru, the director for CEGRAD, to actually throw light on the session and also welcome everybody. Doc, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Akosia. Our Pro Vice Chancellor, Professor Dora Edubuando, Her Highness, the Ambassador of Israel, and her organizers, specifically Gloria, our speakers, Dr. Razak Imoro-Yaya, and Ms. Miriam Baram, the UCC management, staff, and students, ladies and gentlemen, our participants. Good afternoon, good evening, and then good morning, depending on your location. On behalf of the Center for Gender Research, Advocacy and Documentation, that's CEGRAD of the University of Cape Coast, I wish to welcome you all once again to this month's webinar series. This month's one is very special, as mentioned by our moderator, because it is also a public lecture. It is a public lecture or a collaborative public lecture between the University of Cape Coast and then the Embassy of Israel. This program was supposed to have actually been in-person program, but then because of COVID protocols, we decided to move it online, also to allow our virtual participants to join us who have been with us for our numerous programs. It is not surprising when the embassy reached out to us for this program. We were really happy because it also attests to our visibility as a center and as a university. We are most grateful to you, Gloria and her team, for contacting us for this opportunity. And today we are looking at gender and human trafficking. Why this topic? And what exactly is human trafficking? It is an opportunity for us to listen to activists and then theorists deliberate on the issue. Per the opening story of Akosia, it's quite rampant in our social space. Unfortunately, since the beginning of this month, we've also had issues. There have been a series of discussions on intimate partner violence resulting in spousal murders in some cases. The issue of nudity in our social space is also coming up. These vis-a-vis our Ghanaian cultural values, how do we reconcile that? This we think is very appropriate at this time. And from a sociological perspective, it's something we call social imagination, as C.K. Wright knows. So it is a social problem, but also a social issue. And together with human trafficking, they all come within the same domain. Unfortunately, as we'll be seeing very soon, human trafficking is often gendered, in that the experiences of women, of children, and of minority groups are very different. So we are happy to have you all once again gather here to deliberate on this very important topic. On this note, on behalf of the center, staff, organizers, the university, we welcome you especially, and we are really happy to collaborate with you, the Embassy of Israel, as we delve into this topic. Thank you, and then have a very good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Georgina Yao Ojo. She's the director for CEGRAD UCC, and she just gave us a welcome address. I will quickly introduce the chair for this public lecture, and I have a brief write-up that I'm going to read to you. Now, our chair is an associate professor of English. She holds a PhD in language literacy and culture from the University of Iowa in USA, an MPhil in English language, Bachelor of Arts, and a diploma in education, all from the University of Cape Coast. She has a certificate in teaching English to speakers of other languages from the University of Wisconsin in USA. She has been a lecturer of the university for over 20 years and has served as a coordinator of the Communicative Skills Unit, head of the Department of English, dean of the Faculty of Arts, and provost for the College of Humanities and Legal Studies, all at the University of Cape Coast. She's a Fulbright scholar and has published in national and international journals. She is currently the Pro-Vice Chancellor of the University of Cape Coast and serves on many boards and committees, both in and out of the University of Cape Coast. Let me single-handedly welcome our chair, Professor Dora Francisca Edugwando. Prof, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Akosia. Your Excellency, the Ambassador for Israel, the organizers of this very important webinar, Madam Miriam Varam from Israel, and our various speakers from UCC. Good afternoon or good morning, wherever you are. I thank the CEGRAD for asking me to chair this. My question was, since we have a moderator, why do I have to be the chair? But I have been made to understand that it's a public lecture, and by our structure, a public lecture should have a chair. So I'm very happy to chair this. Ladies and gentlemen, when people decide to change their abode and go to another place to migrate or to go and live there, they live out of their own accord. They also decide where they want to go. But that is not so with human trafficking. Human trafficking, according to Falconer 2020, is a trade in human beings. It is recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of people, vulnerable people, through force, fraud, or deception, with the aim of exploiting them for profit. I would say that it is modern day slavery. It is demeaning and it is a crime in many countries. As the director for CEGRAD said, men, women, and children of all ages, people from all backgrounds, of all races, can become victims of this crime. And it happens in all parts of the world. Unlike slavery, human trafficking has no boundaries. Although all people, irrespective of gender, can be trafficked, it is important to note that the literature and the statistics show that human trafficking affects women and girls more than other genders. Today, we are going to listen to speakers talk to us about gender and human trafficking. I'm sure by the time we come to the end of this program, we would understand the issue that we have at hand. The things that we think are just normal, but are actually trafficking of people. We would also understand the roles we play and the roles we should play in order to stop human trafficking in the world. So I thank CEGRAD for asking me to chair, and I'll hand over the mic to the MC, the moderator, to continue with the processing of the webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Chair. We're grateful. At this point, let me also introduce our guest speaker, who's also the Israeli ambassador to Ghana. Now, Her Excellency Shani Cooper is the ambassador of the State of Israel to Ghana, Liberia, and Sierra Leone since 15th of August 2018. From 2016 until her current position, she was Deputy Chief of Mission at the Israeli Embassy in Ankara in Turkey and served a few months as a chargé d'affaires while the ambassador was recalled for consultations. Ms. Cooper joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs after completing the Cadet Corps course in 2006. She held various positions at postings abroad, such as the spokesperson of the Israeli embassy in Cairo, Egypt, and deputy head of mission at the Embassy of Israel in Nicosia, Cyprus. She was appointed deputy director of the South Europe Department at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, specifying in the relations with Turkey, Greece, Cyprus, Malta, and Bulgaria. In this position, she was responsible for the building of the Israel-Cyprus-Greece Trilateral Cooperation and received for her work the MFA's Distinction Award. Earlier in 2003, she worked for Haaretz newspaper as head of desk and news editor, and was also an assistant professor for political science at the Tel Aviv University and at the Open University. Her Excellency Shani Cooper holds a BA degree in political science and journalism and an MA degree in political science, both from Tel Aviv University. She speaks Hebrew, English, and Arabic. She was born on August 16, 1977, and is married and has 2 daughters. Your Excellency, you're welcome. I'll be taking your goodwill message at this point.
Thank you very much. What a nice presentation. And I would like very much to thank UCC, the university in which I visited several times, and we already had some cooperations, but it's a pleasure again and again to have this cooperation, and especially with CEGRAD, such a professional and serious academic center for gender and human generally. And I really am thankful. I would like to also thank Miriam, who can I say, she's my friend after having several dinners together while she was in Ghana, and I'm sure that her perspective will give us a lot of brain food to contemplate about and upon. Of course, I would like to thank Gloria from the embassy who organized this collaboration, and I'm sure we are going to see a very interesting and informative and thought-inspiring discussion. From my side, I would say that human trafficking is a problem that is, let's say, it's easy to swipe it underneath the rug, to leave it to other people, to the peripheral areas, to the poor people, and live as if this phenomenon don't exist at all. But as we know, unfortunately, it is not true. And unfortunately, there are women, men, and children suffering for being sold like baggage to other people. And I have visited one center for trafficked children, and I was amazed to see, first of all, I was amazed to see that there is human trafficking within Ghana, because I was thinking that there are people are selling one to each other between states. But I was really amazed to see these young children and the resilience that they had. They were singing and dancing and welcoming us to their shelter. It was amazing and very touching to see that the human spirit can survive all these kind of things. And I can't wait to hear Miriam's thoughts about what she has seen and the Israeli experience, which, by the way, wasn't very good, I learned at the beginning, and then improved within the years. I really hope we can continue our collaboration, both between the university and the embassy, but also between Ghana and Israel on other humanitarian aspects and specific on human trafficking. And I wish us all a good lecture, beneficial one, and thank you very much again.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency Shani Krupa. She is our special guest of honor for this afternoon. So moving on to our discussion for the afternoon, the topic is gender and human trafficking. And to help us do this, I'll quickly introduce our speakers. In no particular order, Dr. Razak Jaha Imoro. He's a senior lecturer with the Department of Sociology and Anthropology of the University of Cape Coast. He holds a PhD in development studies from the same university. He has been a faculty member of the Department of Sociology since 2008 when he entered as a senior research assistant. Dr. Imoro's teaching at both undergraduate and graduate levels are in the areas of migration, conflict, peace building, research, and statistics. He has also published widely in these areas. He also does outreach by engaging in consultancy engagements in research, mentoring, community service, and speaking activities. Dr. Imoro has won some grants and awards, including Doha Santander Collaborative Research Grant Award through Institute of Global Law and Policy, Harvard Law School, Harvard University, and the United States of America. In the United States of America, I beg your pardon. Dr. Imoro, you're most welcome. Okay, so our other speaker is Ms. Miriam Veram. Ms. Veram is an Israeli social activist with vast experience working with marginalized populations, immigrants, asylum seekers, and human trafficking survivors. She managed the Israeli shelter for men surviving human trafficking, slavery, and forced labor. Miriam is the founder of her memorial dedicated to the reduction and elimination of gender-based murder phenomena in Israel through promoting both public and community advocacy for policy change. She is currently the Gender and Human Trafficking Consultant of the Israeli School of Humanitarian Action. In Ghana, she is conducting a 3-month study in the field of human trafficking with the aim of formulating recommendations for combating the phenomenon. Madam Veram, it's a pleasure to welcome you this afternoon.
Thank you very much for your warm welcome and for your kind words, and thank you for having me.
So thank you very much for accepting to be a part of this public lecture. So Dr. Imoro, we are looking at gender and human trafficking, and we're ready for your presentation.
Okay, thank you. Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much. I am happy to be associated with CEGRAD today, and I'm happy to be part of your webinar series. The introduction has been very thrilling, and as a researcher, it's always interesting to share perspectives, and I'm happy to share a Ghanaian perspective on human trafficking. This is an issue that globally we always describe as modern day crime and modern day slavery. And so I'm going to have this presentation outlined just in this format. And then I'll probably do some bit of details as I go into the various items. So perhaps I'll just start with some key introductions, and then we look at generally what the characteristics of human trafficking looks like in Ghana. And then I take a simple global look at this phenomenon, and then basically also look at what the laws are, and then what Ghana we are doing to curb this phenomenon, and probably suggest some recommendations if need be. So from the beginning, some speakers have made reference to the definitions of human trafficking, and the MC also tried to give a little bit of a story about what human trafficking looks like and how it is happening. But perhaps I feel that a little bit of background is also necessary here. For instance, this whole issue of human trafficking, what basically we describe today as modern day slavery, actually shot into the global frame and attracted much advocacy, publicity, and probably research right from 2000, when popularly what we refer to as the Palermo Protocol was actually enacted. And this Palermo Protocol actually was a debate between two groups that actually resulted into how to define human trafficking. In fact, religious groups held a position about what prostitution should be, and then feminists and other human rights groups also had their own position about what prostitution should be. Actually, something that particularly the religious groups think that, yes, this is against the human rights of people, of women, and other human rights group things that, no, this is actually legitimate labor people subject themselves to and all of that. Now, from the debates that came out, the Palermo Protocol came out with this definition of human trafficking. And the essential things that you would find in most of the definitions that even precede the Palermo Protocol would include force, either threats, either abduction, either deception, or even abuse of power, or even using your position to abuse power and then take advantage of vulnerable people to then recruit or transfer them or harbor them or receive them, okay, for the purposes of virtually two things, either sex exploitation or even labor exploitation. In fact, there is a third leg which talks about, organ removal, but it's also being debated, and this is an issue that is still not virtually accepted in the dialogue of human trafficking. And so beyond the Palermo Protocol, definitions of human trafficking was now being carried on per each country, and then per what you now want to focus on if you are an organization or you are a country that is interested in, dealing with human trafficking issues. So then you see that the U.S. State of Department, they will look at it in terms of, yes, harboring, recruiting, transporting, or provision for labor or services through the use of force, fraud, or coercion. So essentially, this definition is just towing, if you like, the line of the Palermo Protocol. Of course, if you look at Ghana's definition, which is perhaps our concentration for this lecture, Ghana's Ghana's Human Trafficking Act is looking at human trafficking in just the same context within which the Palermo Protocol has outlined, but our concentration is on the fact that there is some trafficking either within the country or outside the country. And again, there is an aspect of benefit. People do these activities for benefits, monetary benefits and other kinds of benefits, which will come up later in the presentation. So you see the definition talks about recruitment, transfer, transportation, harboring or trading or receipt of persons for the purpose of exploitation within and across nations, either by use of threats, force, other forms of coercion, abduction, fraud, deception, or otherwise. And then, of course, receiving payments and benefits for such kind of an activity. And so for us in Ghana, yes, we are interested in looking at human trafficking, both externally and internally, but we are also looking at the modus operandi, which is that, are you receiving any rewards, financial or otherwise, as a result of, receiving, transporting, or even taking custody of an individual, for the purposes of either exploitation or for the purposes of prostitution, and or for other purposes that may be specified as, human trafficking. So a country like ours, perhaps given our checkered history, we actually started looking at human trafficking perhaps in the late 2000s. Actually, the concept of human trafficking contextually within our sociocultural environment, we had a practice. In other words, Ghana's cultural setup where children were actually sent to other relatives and friends and extended family members in other areas of the country to help them and stay with them and all of those things. Some of these actually were trafficking issues, In other words, children basically were trafficked in this mode of sending children to other areas within the country to live with relatives, to stay with relatives, and to help relatives out. And so one of the issues that is making human trafficking in Ghana not that much recognized, particularly before the 2000s, was actually the issue of the fact that people actually send their children and all of those to other areas. And perhaps within the 2000 and before, we did not consciously as a nation, and also we did not keep records of how these trafficking issues looked like, and particularly because we saw them as, virtually quote unquote legal, sort of, you're sending your daughter or something. It did not come under the purview of criminal laws, and it was not recognized as a crime. And so eventually we did not record some of these incidences as human trafficking. And so the aspect of, making sure that we document them, we keep them, and then of course we enact regulations, to deal with this kind of practice, particularly in cases where we could identify that this signified human trafficking. It was not done. And so it only became necessary for us as a country, at least after we enacted the Anti-Human Trafficking Act in 2005. Of course, that was probably four years after the Palermo Protocol. And so after the enactment of our 2005 Anti-Human Trafficking Act, it now became criminal to be found to be engaged in human trafficking. Or perhaps if you were sending, seem to be sending your daughter, son, or somewhere without really explicit reasons why this is happening, and without actually having to understand where the destination is, who is receiving, who is sending, and all of that, then it became modus operandi that such cases could come under the Human Trafficking Act. And so from 2014, at least even from 2011 to 2014, the CID started identifying and then began picking up cases of human trafficking in that manner. And so it became a subject that came under the topmost crimes, if you like, in Ghana. So beyond what we have, armed robbery and all of that, human trafficking from at least the 2014 and beyond became topmost issue in our Ghanaian context. And so it began to actually see more advocacy, it began to actually see more research, and then people started the awareness that there are issues that as individuals we do in Ghana and as a country we should begin to recognize as part of what? Human trafficking. And so again, the country then became both a destination, both a transit, and even an origin point for trafficking issues. And so later we'll come to also see that, yes, people are, trafficked from other countries into Ghana, and people use Ghana also as a transit point to traffic people to particularly Nigeria, Niger, and some other West African countries. I've already intimated a bit about some of the, causes of, human trafficking, at least in Ghana. But primarily, this practice where we send children away has been one of the major issues, particularly with human trafficking in Ghana. And the data, as we'll come to see pretty soon, actually show that children are trafficked a lot in Ghana. And then some of the reasons behind some of these trafficking cases is that they may just be sending their wards to other relatives in lieu of the fact that they could take care of them, even help them to school and all of that. But some actually end up being trafficked. Again, the whole concept of human trafficking is also being caused by ignorance. Ignorance that you don't even know as a parent that, your child is going to engage in this kind of an activity, or you don't even know that this person sending your child may actually, subject your child to other forms of exploitation. And the general psyche amongst people that if I am just sending my child to a relative could actually be, a way to traffic my child becomes something that people are not really quite aware of. But again, we can't also forget about the fact that even though there is advocacy and now there is a lot of awareness going on, there is still lack of education. both for individuals, women, men, and children, and even for some sectors of society and some segments of people, that they don't actually get to understand that human trafficking is existent and has heinous impact and effect on individuals and on children and women. And so lack of education is one of the causes that is also driving human trafficking in Ghana. Of course, issues have come up. I've heard the MC mention poverty. Absolute poverty push people to even more or less sell off their children, and there are cases that show some of these issues. Sell off their children basically to ameliorate their poverty situation, but these children are actually being subjected to exploitation and sexual harassment and then all kinds of inhuman treatment. And that is also further fueling the phenomenon. And so poverty in this side of our world is one of the causes of human trafficking. Of course, others like violence during conflicts, and the fact that we are now in a global environment, the linkages encourage transportation of children through other routes, and linking up with other agencies and, traffickers, and forming a network makes it easier to recruit, people for the purposes of exploitation or for the purposes of sexual abuse and prostitution. So if you look at our context, the Ghanaian context, then you will quickly visualize that this trafficking phenomenon is basically characterized by, exploitation. Victims are also denied their freedom in cases where you have the people going outside the country, particularly to, the Arab world, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar, Dubai, and all of those. They end up having their documents, traveling documents, confiscated, and also within us, we have issues of violence that accompany some of these trafficking cases. And the data also suggests that, yes, some of these people who, by virtue of the fact that they may have realized they are being trafficked, will resist and come into conflict with, traffickers. Sometimes people who even receive them in their destination areas, they suffer all kinds of violence, physical violence, including emotional abuse and all of that, labor, excessive work, and what have you. And so characteristically, our human trafficking cases in Ghana are in the nature of whether it's violence, whether it's exploitation, whether it's deprivation of freedoms of what the individuals involved. Now, let me do a little bit of the global scenario so we can also put Ghana within the context of the global environment to see whether the trafficking that we are experiencing in this country actually has some links or even is within the global spectrum. Perhaps this data gives more clarity. Now, within the world, in the globe, and this is data as recent as 2018, you can see that the number of detected victims have actually risen. They have increased to about 49,032. And if you also look at the number of, or the forms of exploitation, that has also increased. So you look at number of detected victims for which a form of exploitation is actually reported. And these exploitations could be either forced labor, either prostitution, or any other kind of exploitation that comes under the purview of human trafficking. And you see that has also shot up to almost 39,000, almost about 40,000, so 39,805. But what is also of interest globally is to look at the number of persons prosecuted, okay, and of course, the number of convicted persons. So that gives us some job, because if you look at the number of persons prosecuted, that is just only about 7,368, and this is global data. And if you look at the number of convictions, that is just about 3,553. And so you would see a huge gap. Perhaps we can give reasons that, yes, are we able to prosecute? Are we able to do due diligence in some of these traffic cases? Are we also able to uncover more cases? Because the fact that we are not able to convict more people, and indeed the number of prosecuted cases are not also as much if you compare to the number of reported cases, then it means we still have, both as a world and even maybe as a country, we still need to do a lot to be able to, stem this modern day slavery, as we call it. Then if you look at the forms of crimes under human trafficking. Basically, we have forced labor, and then we also have, sexual exploitation, and then other kinds of exploitations as may exist. And I want us to focus on just the two. We have forced labor and then we have sexual exploitation. Perhaps you see that the sexual exploitation saw a rise, particularly in 2014 and then 2016. From 2007, there has been some slight decline over the years. But you see, 2014, it has really shot up, and 2016, it has also shot up. And so it also means that more people have been trafficked, really. It could also still mean that, yes, we are reporting more and more cases of, human trafficking. And so that is what the global data is telling. Of course, sexual exploitation, which is the second aspect of the crimes under human trafficking. You also see that 2015, there is a rise. 2015, 2016 saw a rise in, of course, other kinds of crimes or other kinds of exploitations also exist. And the data from Center for Trafficking Data Collaborative try to illustrate this. Globally also, you look at the gender spectrum of trafficking, and you can see that, like earlier speakers also indicated, women and girls are actually, if you like, more trafficking issues that are actually reported. So you would find from the graph that women occupy a significant proportion of the graph. Girls also occupy a significant proportion. Of course, we cannot leave out boys and men. So the men equally occupy, some reasonable portion of the graph, as well as, boys. So by the gender distribution, in terms of what the graph is showing, we can accept that girls and women mostly suffer some, is concerned. Perhaps, Madam Chair, let me now look at the Ghanaian case. What is happening in Ghana as far as human trafficking is concerned? And some, I think, last 2 years, we tried to do some data collection to see what the situation of human trafficking is like, and it was realized actually that a Human Trafficking Act, it was pretty easier for agencies, mandated to handle human trafficking issues, to actually bring culprits under the umbrella of the act and actually prosecute them and see to if there is some sentences for such, people who may be caught under the act. And so we now began to see that, yes, Ghana has a special, if you like, spectrum and a special space now to deal with human trafficking issues. And that comes under our act, the Human Trafficking Act 2005, which has been amended actually in 2009. Within our country, Volta region, central regions are standing out tall in crimes. Of course, there was a work done in 2002, and that was also the research that shot into the discussion or brought into discussion the issue of human trafficking. And this research was actually conducted around the Volta Lake, where it was realized that boys and girls were used in the Volta Lake for fishing purposes. And most of these girls and boys were actually trafficked. And so the research showed that, in fact, 56.7% of the trafficked children actually work in there. And 40% of these children actually suffer some sexual violence. Of course, you would find that the boys will be taken on shore to do fishing. They will be asked to do deep diving. And sometimes there are stories about how, they face bad weather and have to survive. Some don't survive and all of that. Sometimes they are not fed, and some also die as a result. And the situation has drawn such kinds of attention. And so those particularly trafficked also suffer sexual violence. And the research showed that almost 40% of such girls suffer, this kind of sexual violence. So central region, Volta region, but we also have trafficking cases actually going on in the major cities, particularly in Accra, particularly in Takoradi, Tamale, and even in Kumasi as well. And then a case that perhaps the MC mentioned is Yeji in the Bono East region, which is also a destination point for trafficked children. Again, even within the Eastern region and Ashanti regions, we also have trafficking going on there. I mean, right from 2012, looks like this table. And so as of 2017, we had almost 664 traffic cases, and it runs across the 10 regions. In fact, before these new regions were actually created. What is also of interest is the gender dimension of all this. So you see that males and females, come up topical in this particular data. So you see the number of females and the number of children are far greater, or if you like, comparatively greater compared to males and even the adults. But basically, it is either exploitation of labor or sexual exploitation. So I've already intimated on some of these issues concerning the gender issues that are of importance. So prostitution, subjected to prostitution and all of that, forced labor is also being experienced in this side of our country. Prosecute human trafficking cases, and we have a host of them. Dominant among them now is our Human Trafficking Act, but of course we have the Domestic Violence Act, we have the Children's Act, and we even have the Labor Act. Of course, some other institutions also have specific mandates to deal with issues that we can categorize as human trafficking, particularly the Immigration Service. And then, of course, our general migration policy is also there. What have we been doing as a country? Indeed, Ghana has been, in fact, ranked as a tier 2 country in terms of what we are doing to deal with human trafficking. But there are other kinds of legislations, and these legislations have brought people under the law, and they are being actually prosecuted, and some have been sentenced as far as human trafficking is concerned. And this data also shows some of those prosecutions and then investigations, and particularly those that are yet, if you like, to be investigated. So you look at this data, you see the number of investigations are quite appreciable: 332, number of prosecutions, 553, and those particularly convicted using our Act, 18, those used in the Children's Act, 15. And so some work is being done as far as human trafficking is concerned. Of course, looking at the numbers, it may not be enough, but eventually there is some work that is still going on. So, and we have challenges with corruption, challenges with bureaucracy in the investigations. We have challenges with disaggregating data, synergy among user agencies. Some of the laws also need to be, reworked to be able to actually capture the modus operandi of what we term as human trafficking. To conclude, we can say that human trafficking is persistent in Ghana. It is still going on. Yes, we are not able to tackle the root causes of this phenomenon. Particularly, we're looking at poverty issues, we're looking at the cultural issues. We are unable to tackle the root causes, and that is what, as a country, we should be aiming at. Of course, issues about poor coordination, issues about the laws that we should address, issues about how user agencies can also be able to, team up, work together, share information, so that there can be a coherent, platform to deal with human trafficking cases will be necessary. And so I just proffer some few recommendations, and education is necessary. We also have to retool and resource the institutions mandated to do this. Investigations is also necessary. In fact, training the personnel particularly is important in all this. Provide adequate support for victims of trafficking is also important, that we look at that as a country. A clear-cut mandate is also required in all this, so that we know which institution is actually having that, if you like, overarching mandate as far as human trafficking is concerned. So I'll just end here, and then perhaps if there are any other discussions that I can contribute to or raise some questions for responses, I'm most grateful.
Right. Thank you very much, Dr. Imo. It's been great listening to you. There are a few questions that I'll be posing to you after we listen to Madam Variam with her presentation. But thank you for giving us the Ghanaian perspective to the discussion we are having this afternoon. So I'll come to Madam Miriam Variam, and they'll be taking your presentation on gender and human trafficking, and probably you bring in the international perspective on this discussion.
Thank you very much for having me and for this discussion. So again, thank you. And as you were told, my name is Miriam, and I'm the Israeli consultant for the human rights and gender consultant for the Israeli School for Humanitarian Action. And last month, I returned from Accra, having stayed in Ghana for about three months, conducting a study about human trafficking in Ghana with the aid of the Israeli Embassy and TRUG, the Commission for Human Rights and Administrative Justice. And for our discussion today, I will speak a little bit about human trafficking in Israel and give you a little background. So I also want to start with the Palermo Protocol, and I think that this is the best way to start any discussion about human trafficking. And this is how the UN defined what is human trafficking. And as you were told, this also the definition the Ghana government used when they wrote the Human Trafficking Act in Ghana, and also the definition Israel used when we wrote our human trafficking laws to prevent human trafficking in Israel. So I urge you, all of you, to Google it after it if you like to learn more about human trafficking. It's a great start. And every year, the UN State Department is publishing a yearly report about what countries around the world are doing in order to prevent human trafficking in the countries, in their borders. And from the year 2012, Israel is rated Tier 1, which means that Israel is doing good enough measure in order to combat human trafficking in Israel. And as you were told by Dr. Radek, Ghana is ranked Tier 2. So when I've been to Ghana, I come across two major phenomena that you also been talked about earlier today, which is domestic trafficking in Ghana, which means Ghanaian citizens being trafficking in Ghana, and also child labor. Now, Israel don't really have this issue. I mean, we do have some cases, it's sporadic cases. It's not the main issue. There was only one case that a woman, an Israeli woman, stayed in the Israeli shelter for human trafficking survivor. And I only recalled one case of child labor being brought to court. But obviously, we do have some more of these cases, but it's for sure not the main issue. However, Israel is a destination country for international trafficking, which means other citizens from other countries are brought to Israel or coming by their own to Israel and being trafficked in Israel. And I will speak to you about the major phenomena. Obviously, we have other cases in Israel, and it's various from year to year. Every year we can see a new phenomena. There is always something new that's coming to Israel, but there are three major ones that remain constant through the year. The first one is sex trafficking. Up until the mid-2000s, Israel was a paradise of sex trafficking. Women from all around the world have been trafficked into Israel and been held in severe condition to forced prostitution. But as I said, now Israel is ranked one of the top in the world in combating human trafficking. So we did a very good job to fight this phenomenon in Israel. Unfortunately, in the last few years, 3 or 4 years, we can see a renewal of this phenomena, which women, mainly from Eastern European countries, are coming to Israel with tourism visa for a period of 3 months, So they're coming legally as a tourist, but they're not allowed to work, and they're working in prostitution in Israel. In some of the cases, they're knowingly doing so, meaning they're knowing that they are going to Israel in order to be working in prostitution. Some of the cases, they are not aware of the rough condition in Israel for women in prostitution, which mean a very large amount of clients that every night are coming to visit them. But even so, even if they give their permission and they're knowingly doing so, it doesn't matter by the Israeli law and by the Palermo Protocol. A person cannot give his consent to enter a trafficking situation. So it doesn't matter if they gave their consent or didn't give their consent. The second phenomena that is one of the major one in Israel, it's what we are calling the torture camp survivor. All of these victims and survivors are asylum seekers who arrived to Israel. And you can see on the map here, it is a map of Israel and Eastern Africa. And the majority of the asylum seekers in Israel are coming from Sudan and from Eritrea. And you can see on the map the way that they need to go in order to arrive to Israel. They need to go through Egypt. And in Egypt, they're being kidnapped by the Rashida tribe, which is a Bedouin tribe that is living all across the Middle East, not only in Egypt. They also have some families in Israel and other places in the Middle East. And they're being kidnapped and they're being tortured by severe physical violence, severe sexual violence. And they're calling their family by the phone, and the family can hear them screaming and begging. And it's for order to them to get ransom from the family in Eritrea, in Israel, or abroad. And when they're being released, they're being released in the Israeli and Egypt border, and they're coming to Israel with severe physical and emotional damage. Now, unfortunately, the Israeli law and the Palermo Protocol did not recognize ransom as a human trafficking phenomena. But luckily enough, if a person can prove that he or she has been forced to work while in captivity, they can be recognized by the Israel government as a trafficker survivor for labor or for sexual exploitation. If the physical and if the sexual violence was so severe, it can be recognized as a sexual trafficker. So if they have been recognized and a small amount of the survivor is being recognized by the Israel government as survivors, they're getting a support from the government. They can get to the Center for Human Trafficking Survivors in Tel Aviv, and they can go to the shelter. They're getting special humanitarian status from the government, and they can also get special medical support and special sociological support from the government. Now, it's worth mentioning that the victims are not from Israel. The crime was not made in Israel, and the trafficker is not Israeli. And yet, the Israel government gives this survivor all the support that they need and they can offer them, because we understand that we are one of the global community, and we need to give them all the support that we can give them. As long as they're staying in Israel, they're our responsibility. The third phenomenon in Israel, the major phenomena, obviously there are more than three, it's migrant workers that come to Israel. And most of the time, they will come to Israel legally in order to work in Israel legally. But when they're starting to work, their conditions that they're meeting are so severe that they can be considered as a slavery condition. And that means that they're working physical labor, hard physical labor, with no breaks, with no vacation, with no day off. A lot of the time, their living conditions are not good, just a mat on the floor or something like that. A lot of the cases, they don't get paid, or they get paid a small amount. And some of the cases, their passport is being taken from them, so they cannot leave. And some of the cases, they need to pay in order to go to Israel, which is illegal in Israel. You can only pay a very small amount to a very special agency, and some of the cases are not like that. And in these cases, they can be considered as slavery, as modern slavery, and they also can go to the shelter and get a special humanitarian aid status from the government. And these cases can come from all across the world, but mainly from Eastern European countries and from East Asia countries, from the Far East in Asia. But I came across cases from Mexico, from Sudan, South Sudan as well. So they can be from any place in the world. As you can see, I wrote here from which gender and sex the victims are. So obviously, you can be a man being trafficking for sex, but the majority are women. And from the torture camp survivor, there are a lot of cases where men being raped and they're being considered to be victims of sex trafficking because of the severe sexual violence that have been in the torture camp. And from the labor part, from the migrant workers, obviously, women can be trafficked for labor as well as sex trafficking. But again, even if this woman being trafficked in labor for domestic work, for example, or for nurturing, for example, a lot of the cases, there have been sexual violence involved as well. And this is one of the ways that they're being exploited. And again, not getting paid and stuff like that. So what Israel is doing in order to prevent human trafficking in Israel? We use the 3 Ps, and I know that Ghana using this thing as well. So Israel have a special unit in the police who investigated human trafficking. And again, the majority of the victims of human trafficking will not be Israeli. So this unit have to know how to communicate with different languages, different cultures. Some of the times, the people that are coming are afraid of the police. If the police is corrupted in their home countries, they will not want to collaborate with the police. And they specialize in this kind of investigation. And also they specialize with collaboration with other police units around the world. When I've been to Ghana, I met with the director, with the chief of the human trafficking unit in Ghana. So Ghana has also a special unit that specializes in human trafficking cases. And also we have a few cases who brought to court and the trafficker was convicted and been sent to up to 16 or 15 years in prison. But if you ask me, there are more to do in this area. The other part is protection, which is close to my heart because I used to manage the human trafficking shelter for men in Israel. Israel have 3 shelters. One is for women, the other is for men, which I used to manage. And the other shelter is for single mothers with young children, and they cannot go to the regular shelter because of the children. So we have 3 shelters. And again, the majority of this population is not Israeli. So as long as they're staying in the shelter, they have a special humanitarian status, which gives them the permission to work in Israel. And working is a very big deal for them. Because as Dr. Raznek said before, poverty is one of the main reasons why people are entering human trafficking status. So they're coming to Israel with debts. Sometimes they have a family, a member of the family who's sick in their home countries and they need to pay for him. And this is the reason they came to Israel. A lot of the time, again, they needed to pay in order to come to Israel, so they have debts and they need to work. So working permission is one of the main things that we use in order to get them rehabilitation. Because if they're only thinking about what I need to do in order to get money to send to my family, they will choose to go back to slavery condition and being trafficking, because their family is dependent on them. So it's very important. And they can stay in the shelter as long as the police are interrogating the crime and as long as the case is being brought to court. But what's happening if they don't want to make a complaint to the police, and if they don't want to appear in court? Well, they can still stay at the shelter, but only for a period of a year. And after this year, they're going to go back to their home countries. But in this year, they get all the rehabilitation they deserve from the government, including legal aid, and they can also sue the person who trafficked them and get payment from them as well by the legal aid department. Prevention is what Israel is doing in order to prevent victims to enter Israel. So Israel have special training for officers in airports, in borders, in order to recognize what human trafficking look like. So this is one of the things that we are using in order to prevent human trafficking victims to enter Israel. The other thing that we are using is bilateral agreement with, we have them with several countries. The first one was with Thailand, and it's still going, and it's having a very good effect. And in the bilateral agreement, Israel is having special people that are coming to the other countries, like Eastern European countries, and explain to people about the dangers of coming to Israel, especially women, and telling them that maybe coming to Israel is not that safe and what they need to do in order to protect themselves. And if you think about that, it's not really something a government in a country would like to do, going abroad and telling people it's dangerous to come to our country. It doesn't make us look very good. But again, we're taking this issue of preventing human trafficking and combat human trafficking very serious. So we think that it's a good thing that we need to do in order to prevent human trafficking. So I promised to speak about gender, and usually I will ask you what gender is, but I can't really ask you right now. So usually people will say to me, it's a woman issue. Sometimes they will speak about children. Sometimes they will speak about the LGBTQ community. But there are one gender people are not looking at, which is the unseen gender, men. Are women and girls, mainly in the sex industry, but men, they're not 71%, but no one's looking at them. When I work at the men's shelter in Israel, the neighbor shelter, which is the women's shelter, full with victims, full with survivors every time. But when I work at the shelter, the men's shelter was always half empty. And when I've been to Ghana, I learned that Ghana have only one governmental shelter for women, but none for men. There are a lot of shelters from NGOs, especially for children, which are also boy and girls. But for adults, only one shelter for women. But of course, there are there are men who are suffering this condition, and they need to get their attention. Because if we are not aware of them, because we think, well, human trafficking is only for sex trafficking, and it's only for women, and only for girls, so we are not aware of their condition or their situation, and they're not getting the help that they need, and they're not getting rescue, and it's a big issue. And I also want to think about gender in the wider sense of gender, because gender is on not only sex, it's on not only women and men. It's about structure of power. And again, as we are told, poverty is one of the main reason for people to get into trafficking situation. As I said, the majority of the victims in Israel are coming from poorer countries, from Eastern European countries, from Asia, from some of them from Africa, and Israel has the power here. And I think that we also need to think about this issue in the global issue, because again, Ghana, victims from Ghana, living in Ghana, to the Middle East in order to work there, and it's more richer countries that trafficking from Ghana, and I think that we need to think about that as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Miriam. Thank you for your presentation. But then before I go back to Dr. Imoro, I want to get the understanding. Is it to say that there is nothing like domestic human trafficking in Israel?
Well, I will not say that there is nothing, because there are only one case that's being brought to court and being convicted, and one case that's been brought to court and doesn't get convicted. So there are some, but the shelter is mainly for people from abroad. The one case of a woman, an Israeli woman sent to the shelter, but only one. So there are some cases, and there are some cases of child labor, but it's sporadic cases. It's not the main issue.
All right, sure. Thank you very much. Let me come to you, Dr. Imoro. Professor Dubando would like to understand the clear distinction when it comes to culturally people sending their children, to go and stay with aunties and all that. Would you categorize that as trafficking as well? Because a lot of us have benefited from some of these things, where you go and live with an auntie who takes care of you, who would assist you to get some education and all that. Let's draw the lines properly, because I can cite an example from Ekumfi, for example, where during every vacation, some areas in the district virtually become empty because almost all the children in there or the youth you find in there are traveling to other parts to go and then get some income and come back. Let's draw the lines culturally. What human trafficking actually entails within our context of Ghanaians.
Yes, so actually the issue is not just sending our children and all of that to, relatives, and I mean, that's pretty fine. But what is the problem is that traffickers also take advantage of this cultural practice. There's a case in Winneba. I didn't get to read that case. There's a case in Winneba where a relative, in fact, the person lived in Yeji, a woman and a woman lives in Yeji, and came back, got to one of their relatives and says, oh, give us your 9-year-old boy so that he can help us. Then the woman agreed. Then they left. And he said, okay, I will allow this person to come for the child. There's a prior negotiation between, those in Yeji and who will bring the child. And when this person took the child, in fact, invariably, the child, 9 years old, went to a different person altogether. And the child was subjected to servitude, you might call it. 9 years old boy making, have to dive into the sea and do all of those things. And he had to take somebody to rescue the child. So sometimes, yes, we just by word of mouth, trust of customs and practices that, oh, go and live with this my relative or go and live with this friend. But the arrangement is such that you give space for these traffickers to also take advantage. Of course, they profit from it, because in this particular case that I'm citing, the agreement was that, okay, if you are able to do it, if we are to give, say, the child 100 Ghana a month, we would rather give that 100 Ghana to you monthly. And so we don't have to give room for traffickers to take advantage and then milk from the situation and indeed subject people to inhuman treatment. So the practice itself is cultural, is still going on, but traffickers are also taking advantage of this cultural practice to engage in trafficking. Now, you go to the Volta region, like we are saying, a lot of children have been trafficked to the Volta region. And even the parents, the wards of these children are not aware that, this is the kind of job or this is the kind of treatment our children are subjected to. And bear me out, they have no contacts, they are given little food and all of that. Meanwhile, you as the parent may be comfortable that my child is in good hands. So it's just suffice to say a mere cultural practice, but it is an avenue where traffickers are using to recruit people for purposes of trafficking.
Right. Thank you very much. Let me pose this question to Miriam. This is coming from Janet Boateng, and she wants to find out, is there a relationship between the leadership of the country and then the prevalence of human trafficking? To say that if there's a country where you have more men in authority, could it also get the human trafficking levels of that country going high? Or let's say probably if there are more women in leadership, combating human trafficking works better. Is there any relationship between leadership and then combating human trafficking?
Wow, this is an excellent question. Unfortunately, I don't know any study that was made in this area. I believe that there is a connection. We can see globally that where there are more women in place of authorities, we can see a decrease in corruption, a decrease in crime, and decrease of violence. And corruption and human trafficking have a very strong link because if there is corruption, it's easier to traffic between countries and between borders. So I think that there is a connection, and I will be happy to read someday a study about this issue.
Right. Now, Dr. Moore, you mentioned that Ghana, when it comes to efforts in combating human trafficking, is at the tier 2 level. We want to understand what exactly that means.
Yes. Actually, so we have tier 1, we have tier 2. So the tier 1 will be those countries that, for instance, I'm sure maybe Israel, I don't know if they probably have gotten to tier 1 now.
Yes, you mentioned that Israel is tier 1 now.
Right. So it means the efforts that each country, particularly after this, our Palermo Protocol, what each country is actually doing to be able to curb or eliminate trafficking. So it simply means the efforts that each country is making towards, minimizing or curbing or eliminating human trafficking. And so we are making some efforts. And so, for instance, as a country, we have, under the Human Trafficking Act, we have a whole secretariat. And of course, if you go to the police, they have a human trafficking unit. And indeed, even the Ghana Immigration Service also have now taken on board human trafficking. Then the Ministry of Women and Gender, also they are tackling issues of human trafficking. And indeed, we have an operating manual that guides activities of human trafficking. So if, like, Miriam talked about the 3 Ps, protection, prevention, prosecution. And we are doing, we are making efforts in all of this. So based on the fact that we have at least enacted a law, and then we are getting to prosecute people, and then we have a legal framework, and more, we are making efforts at, reaching out to even places where this phenomenon is being carried out. Then the global body that is in charge of, appraising countries ranked us in the tier 2. And so perhaps if we put in more efforts, and perhaps if we broaden the base of our legal framework and get to train people to be able to, understand actually what should constitute human trafficking, particularly when it comes to prosecution, I think we'll make a good way forward.
Okay, Miriam, one important aspect for me is the reintegration of survivors, when it comes to human trafficking. And you have been to Ghana, you've conducted a study and all that. What was your assessment when it comes to reintegrating survivors of human trafficking?
In Ghana or in Israel?
In Ghana.
In Ghana. Well, the main issue in Ghana is that your country is so big. Israel is very small considering to Ghana, and actually considering for the majority of the countries in the world. So again, there is only one shelter for women, for adults, and it's only for women. And I believe it's in Accra. But what's happening if the victim is not from a crowd, not near a crowd? If the victim is from Tamale or one of the villages, the far villages, so they will choose not to stay in the shelter and not get support from the government and not support and not getting rehabilitation. So I think that the government of Ghana need to find a solution that will allow victims to get support and to get assistance and to get rehabilitation in their home village or their home cities, in order to get them more help and make it easier for them.
All right. Now, there's another question. I'll come to you again before I come to Dr. Imoro. We want to understand the distinction between child work, child trafficking, child labor, I beg your pardon, and then child trafficking. What is the distinction between these three? Child work, child labor, and child trafficking.
The question is for me?
Yes, for you, Miriam.
Okay, great. So again, excellent question. Well, child labor, it's when the work is harming for the child. If it's physical harming them or emotional harming them, it will be child labor. In Ghana, there is a phenomena of young girls, mainly, walking on the street, selling stuff, carrying basket on their head. And these baskets are very, very heavy, and they're damaging their spinal. So that will be considered as a child labor. But if a child is helping around the house or helping at school, but it's not damaging, it's not long hours, it's not getting abused, not getting yelled off, so it will hurt him emotionally, he's not getting physical abuse and beating, so that will be considered as a proper child work.
Right.
And I want to mention that not all child labor is child trafficking, because in order to be trafficked, you need to move from place to place. This can be inside of Ghana, so it will be domestic trafficking, but a child can be held in child labor and slavery condition at home as well, and it will not be trafficking. It will only be slavery and labor.
Right. Thank you very much. Dr. Jaha,
Yes.
This question is coming to you. I would want to find out, and Ebenezer is posing this question, he wants to find out what has been the implementation plan to mitigate the menace of human trafficking within the Ghanaian space, and at what point in that plan have we reached as a country, and has there been any progress at all?
Yes, we are making some efforts. Indeed, as we stand now, the Ministry of Gender and is it Children's Protection or Child's Protection, they actually convened a workshop to do a similar thing. In other words, to appraise the efforts and to look at where they need to concentrate on and see the way forward. And you see, as a country, for us now, we clearly know that the act is our binding principle. And so we are able now to prosecute cases under the act. But what we need to do now is to be able to work in such a way that we can prosecute more of these cases. There are often times where issues come up, you find interferences in the processes of prosecution and the cases go, stale. But what is also our problem now is that there is supposed to be a ministerial committee that should meet regularly to both resource and, update user agencies on how far they are going and what we should be doing moving forward. Unfortunately, perhaps the resource constraints have not allowed really this ministerial committee to even, prosecute that agenda. Now, what we should be thinking of as a country now is that how do we actually make a successful case that indeed we are dealing with human trafficking? And in Ghana, perhaps let me say that our case is just the child trafficking, either in labor or sexual exploitation. And so, like Miriam mentioned, yes, we have the shelter in, I think in Osu. And we are saying that this is sometimes mixed shift shelters that are created. And so after some time, 3 months, 6 months, you try to see whether you can now do some reintegration. Of course, within the last year, I think from 2 years back, some NGOs have come in and they are trying to actually mainstream some of these survivors through the social welfare into mainstream education, so they can go through basic school and progress as it is. And so we need to step up that effort. And again, bodies that, for instance, deal with human trafficking, particularly the Ghana Police Service, particularly Immigration Service, and then some of the other user agencies should collaborate, because they operate in, if you like, bits and pieces. Immigration does a different thing, the police will also do a different thing. And so there should be some opportunity for us to, put all these institutions together to share the information, then we can make progress. And perhaps if we are able to do that, and then we should have permanent structures. Of course, the NGOs are doing a lot. Of course, even in the Volta region, there are some makeshift structures there, which after some point, 3 months maximum, they will just say, okay, can we reintegrate them and all of that? But we need permanent structures, elaborate structures that will, rescued, or survivors will have the time to go through a whole rehabilitation. Then they can be reintegrated into society. So it's perhaps compared to from the passing of our act up to 2005 to now, perhaps I may say it's too short, but we have made effort to be able to bring some of these things under control. Don't forget, this is also quite a clandestine activity, and so it's not easy tracking down traffickers per se. And so public education awareness to bring up the issues, to report the issues, will also help, because now at least prosecution is there and people are being prosecuted day in, day out for crimes of trafficking. And so we cannot shelve the issue under the carpet. And then we should be able to now say that as a country, we have prioritized trafficking as an issue, because it affects the health and even the socioeconomic development of this nation.
Right, Dr. Daha, before you go, let me ask this other question. Professor Dupando is asking, what is the survival rate of victims in Ghana?
Wow, perhaps I haven't done any other study in that area to really look at survival rate, but I think more and more children are being rescued. Now, when you look at the coastal belt, before this presentation, I spoke to the PRO for Ghana Police Service, in fact, Central Region, and fortunately, she's also the head of the anti-trafficking unit here. And when you look at the coastal belt, now they also make an effort to recruit police personnel that will do vigilance and surveillance, particularly along the coast, to be able to identify and pick up information about these traffickers. And so more and more girls, women, and even boys particularly are being saved from, reaching, if you like, their destinations. But perhaps we have to aggregate them and see if, as a whole, we are making 20-30% of success in that area. But even within the Volta region, now there is a lot of awareness. In fact, a lot of studies have gone into Volta region, particularly on the Volta Lake. That is where you find a lot of, the children that are being trafficked in there. And people are gradually getting aware. So even when you bring a new boy or new girl, sometimes people are able to volunteer information that, hey, this is the work you are going to do. Are your parents aware and all of that? And that also solves, our problem.
Fine. Thank you very much. Ms. Varam, let me ask again that the issue of reintegration keeps coming up in my questions. take us through, when you're talking about reintegration, what exactly are the processes? And again, when survivors are reintegrated and then sent back to their families, what are some of the feedback that you get?
Well, it's varies from case to case, and what was the violence they incur. In some cases, the family do not accept them, especially in cases of sexual violence. Women have been victims of sexual violence. If it's children, if it's a child that has been sent from the family, sometimes the family will not accept him because they already sent him and they don't want any problem with a trafficker because they have other children to think about. It's dangerous. So the child can be found in an orphanage some of the time, but in some of the cases, they are very happy to receive them back, especially with adults who have been trafficking outside of Ghana to the Middle East or to Europe. And some of the cases, the family is the reason that they're being rescued because the family has made a complaint to the police that their family member is missing or the family member has managed to contact them and ask them for assistance. So it's different in any case. And the rehabilitation part is very important as well, because I believe that even in cases that the family don't want anything to do with the survivors or with the victims, in some of the cases, with the proper help of a social worker that will bridge them, the situation, it was not their fault, they've been victimized, and they need the support. In some of the cases, they will get their family back.
You know, this yes, reintegration. I think we have to also applaud what the religious institutions are doing, because, of course, there's a case also where we have to bring in the religious institutions. There's a case of this boy who actually returned partially blind. One eye was gone, and the family was terrified that, you know, we gave you this boy for this. Now you've brought him back partially blind, you know. And so religion also plays a role here, and the religious institutions are also contributing to this. There's a study that the International Justice Mission did, same on the Volta region, and they tried to reintegrate some of, you know, these survivors. And in those cases, they have to actually sort the audience of the religious bodies to do some kind of counseling, or so to speak, to talk to families before, you know, their family members actually are brought back to them. And so that effort goes on. Perhaps this may be just a few of those cases, but you see, we don't do like mass reintegration because victims are spread around the country, and sometimes tracing and going back, logistical problems and all of those things come up. But where, for instance, in Osu, where the shelter is, they try to see if you can get the child halfway, perhaps some primary school, or, you know, get the child into school before you think about the reintegration. Then you have to bring in the religious bodies and stuff like that.
Ms. Varam, I'll be coming back to you. Would really want to understand what the rehabilitation and reintegration is all about. But before I come to you, let me ask Dr. Jaha. You know, a lot of talking, a lot of education has been done about women traveling to Dubai and these other Arab countries and the situations that await them when they go there. We want to find out what exactly can be done to control these things, because the education is out there. You know, a lot of people have returned to tell their stories, but you still do get people who are willing to move to these areas.
Wow, yeah, so that's another big area that we as a country must look at. I think if you look at the modus operandi, the recruitment of, you know, these people, either through internet, fake job agencies, and, you know, through friends and connection men or women and stuff like that. So gradually, people are getting aware that you can actually get yourself into trouble if you don't pass through the right process. So perhaps as a country, we need to begin to be more official and, you know, be a little bit open about some of these possibilities, so to speak, in, you know, the Middle East and other areas, Dubai, Qatar, and all of that, Saudi Arabia. We need to be very official about it. Do we have officially registered recruitment agencies that can take you through the process and so get you the job that you said you want? And in Ghana, perhaps very few, very, very few. And so also don't forget that the basis of all this is that you want to improve your economic situation. And so if you can improve your economic situation within the country, migrating or going through the desert and all of that may not be a viable option for you. And so we have to improve the conditions of particularly migrant workers and all of those people who come down from particularly the northern side of the country to seek greener pastures in the south. Let's find a way to improve the conditions of work, and then we can have a head start on. Now, don't also forget, you remember, I don't know, but 3 years back, we had some issues in some of these countries, and our Foreign Affairs Ministry had to step in. And the first thing was that, do we have legitimate registered bodies, both in Ghana and in these countries, that the bilateral agreements can be worked out so that if you are traveling to Dubai or to Qatar or to Saudi Arabia or Bahrain, this will guide you and you are officially recognized as a migrant in that country. And those are the things that we have to begin to work on. Of course, the illegal routes are always there, but of course, I think Miriam will agree with me that migrant smuggling is also different from, you know, the human trafficking, you know, because the migrant smuggling, you consent to it that I want to go out there, and you now be taken through the illegal routes. Then you get there and you can be trafficked. And so there is maybe a link, so tight a link between even the migrant smuggling and human trafficking.
Right. Thank you very much. So, Ms. Bayram, lastly, let's understand rehabilitation or reintegration, and that'll be it for us.
Okay, I just want to make another remark about smuggling, immigrant smuggling. What I said about asylum seeker in Israel. Well, this phenomenon started with migrant smuggling. It's not started as human trafficking. Asylum seeker needed to cross the border to Israel, and they used smugglers. And the smugglers, in some point, realized, well, it will be more profit if we will start trafficking with them as well.
Right.
And about rehabilitation, well, I can speak about rehabilitation in Israel easier than rehabilitation in Ghana. And what we are doing in Israel is, first of all, making sure that they will receive medical aid if they need some. Some of the times they don't need, but a lot of the time, especially victims of torture camps and victims of sexual exploitation need medical attention. They need emotional attention. And again, in Israel, it's very difficult because they are coming from various cultures. So how am I, a social worker from Israel, can start giving emotional support from someone from China who don't even speak English, he only speak Mandarin, and how can I start a conversation with him, and how can I understand his cultural background? So this is one of the difficulty in Israel. But as we told again and again during the session, one of the main problems that started human trafficking is poverty, and they need a place to work in. So what we are trying to do in Israel is give them basic tools in order to them to get a place to work when they come to their origin countries. So we have language lessons, which is mainly English, because it will almost always be expected. Some of the times we get them training in special skills like cell phone repairment, So there, when they're going back to their countries, they can open a little shop and they will get income from this little shop, and they will not need to immigrate to another countries. And sometimes via other organization, actually an organization that I used to work in called CIMI, the Center for International Migration and Integration. CIMI have special units that specialize in resending people back to their countries. So Israel will give, in some cases, not of all of them, Israel will give you a small amount of money in order to you to open some small businesses in your home countries, or to buy a house in your home countries, so you will have a start.
Right. But lastly, have you ever had on record a situation where a survivor is returned to the home country and the person has been denied access?
Well,
right.
yes,
So
it
happens?
do happen. We will not send them back to their home countries. So they will get denied entered in Israel. We will not buy them the plane ticket if we are not sure that they will be given the opportunity to enter the country. In this case, the IOM or UNHCR will be involved. IOM is the International Organization for Migration, and UNHCR is the UN for asylum seekers, and they will get resettled in a third country, mainly Europe or the US or Canada. In some cases, Australia as well.
So let me just indicate that Ambassador Shani Cooper has exited the platform. She indicated that she's grateful to our speakers for the very insightful presentations that he gave. She's learned a lot, but then at the moment she'd have to leave. So at the moment she's exited the platform, but she extends a lot of appreciation to the speakers and all of you who made it this afternoon, morning, wherever you find yourself. So I'll be going back to Professor Chair for her final words. Professor Duvando.
Thank you very much, my moderator. And thank you, CEGRAD, for putting this together. If you read the chat, you realize that I asked a lot of questions, and it tells you how much I have learned from this webinar. I have learned so much about the human trafficking, and I realize, truthfully, that it's a global phenomenon, and that women and children are more trafficked, but men and boys are also trafficked. And it looks like we have zeroed in on women and children and maybe forgotten the men and boys. And I think we need to look at that too closely. I also got to know that the exploitation is mainly sexual and also forced labor more than the other exploitations. And as I said at the beginning of the webinar, human trafficking is demeaning. It's demeaning to the individual, and we need, as a society, the global world, we need to look at it seriously. It's interesting to note the efforts that Ghana is making. It gives me a lot of comfort that truly we are doing something in our country. And when I listen to Mariam, I realize how much distance is between us and Israel, and we need to work harder. The first time I heard about this on CNN, I said that no, in Ghana, we don't have any human trafficking. But later on, when I saw the images and I read a few things about that, then I realized that we are also ignorant about what is happening right under our noses. And we need to educate the public and also advocate so that we will bring this evil phenomena to an end. The PPP is good, the protection, the prosecution, and the prevention is good. And I hope that we will all continue to do that so that every human can live with dignity. I thank CEGRAD for this eye-opening webinar, and I hope that we'll meet again so that we'll look at other social issues that we have swept under the carpet. I thank you for inviting me to chair this. Thank you very much, Mariam, for sharing your perspective on it, not only from the Israel part, but also what you know about the situation in Ghana. And my own Dr. Jaha, we thank you very much for exposing us to what we didn't know about our own country. We pray that this will be an eye-opener for all of us and to make sure that we are not participants in this evil business. I thank you very much.
Right. Thank you very much, Prof, for also accepting to be part of this public lecture. We're so grateful for your time. And to everybody, we extend so much appreciation to you. Indeed, our students at UCC are writing the examination, so I'm sure a lot of them could not join us, but we are so impressed with the participation we have enjoyed this afternoon. Thank you, Dr. Odru, Director for CEGRAD UCC, and thank you to our speakers once again. To everybody, I extend a lot of appreciation. Hopefully next month, another interesting one will be cooking and I'll be serving pretty soon. To all of you, I wish you the best. Thank you so much and bye-bye.